I will address 4 topics in this presentation. I'll give you some brief comments on the new rural paradigm as developed by the OECD. This is a convenient way to set the scene and outline in general terms what we know. I'll then identify a few of the lessons for rural governance that emerge from this work, and the more general research and practical experience that's taking place in rural development. And I'll put to you 2 questions that I suggest you consider for discussion as you move ahead on your agenda. And finally, I'll make a few comments on the 7 key action items that you have identified as part of the Harnessing the Tide report. This slide is here to remind us that rural Canada has changed significantly over the last 50 years. We've become more diverse, more mobile, and more complex. No longer is rural simply a resource economy, but it's much more mixed, with services and amenities, manufacturing, and note here that rural manufacturing has remained competitive with urban manufacturing. This is something to keep in mind as we look for rural assets and opportunities. There's also increased demands for knowledge on businesses, producers, and municipal governments and NGOs. And finally, it's not enough to know only about the local scene, but we need to know what's going on in the region, the province, the country, and the world. That's why building capacity to understand and meet these new conditions has become the center of attention for so many policymakers, practitioners, and researchers. So how do we build capacity for these new rural conditions? It may come as a surprise that we know quite a bit about this already. That's why I'm not going to spend a great deal of time making the case for the general principles of regional governance. Instead, I'll largely accept these principles as they've been formulated by the OECD and put 2 questions to you for discussion. These are the questions that need to be answered with a particular context, like BC, in order to move ahead on the general principles. The first is, what are the current regional assets and capacities and where are they located? And secondly, how can they be supported? In 2006, the OECD released a report describing the new rural conditions, along with some principles of governance that they felt were most appropriate for these conditions. Last year, their territorial committee met in Quebec City to review the document and add to it the subsequent insights that they had gained from their ongoing comparative project on rural and regional governance. Their conclusions are consistent with a considerable body of research on governance, rural, regional, and community development. And they identify, first of all, that we need to build all types of local and regional assets. The focus is no longer on subsidies primarily to primary industries, but on investments, and it goes further than that. It recognizes that economic development is not just about economic activities and organizations, and certainly not just about 1 or 2 economic sectors. Improving all conditions is necessary for economic sustainability. Social, health, education, recreation, and welfare are all important goals along with the traditional economic ones. They also affirm that sustainable regional development requires a bottom-up approach to empower local and regional organizations. If the local communities and regions are not taking initiative, we're left with local dependency that is a drain on all levels of the economy. Since all assets are relevant at a regional level, this means increasing the opportunities and requirements for enhancing coordination within and among government departments at all levels. It often requires restructuring and, as I'll elaborate shortly, reorganizing the old ways of operating. It also means that we need to learn how to think rural. Effective regional development requires a new awareness and appreciation of rural and remote places and people. We need to learn what those places are like, what are the special demands they face, how largely urban-based policies affect rural people and places, and what those people and places offer to urban centers. We're fighting an uphill battle on this since our population is becoming more urban, and the past generation of urbanites that did have rural roots will soon be dying off. An example of the impacts of this lack of sensibility can be seen in the recent cancellation of funding for the Rural Division of Statistics Canada. We're in danger of losing our ability to collect, analyze, and distribute information about rural and remote Canada as a result of this decision. This undermines your proposal for strong rural advocates. If the data is not there, it will be difficult to identify the challenges, assess any changes, or make an evidence-based case for rural communities.